Welcome everyone. Continue those that are writing who you are in the chat and what you do. I'd like to introduce Gina from San Education Adventist Healthcare to this session. I know this is a repeat session, so we really appreciate that you've taken the time out to present this twice for us, as others have as well. And so Gina's going to talk about harnessing technology in healthcare. So without further ado, thanks again, Gina, and I'll pass the mic over to you.
Okay, thanks, Teresa. How's my audio sound? Okay? Okay, great. Thanks, Teresa. All right, so welcome everybody, and happy weekend, because it's Saturday morning, which is really strange presenting on a Saturday morning at home, sort of with the family around. So it's something I haven't done before, but it's pretty cool. So I did present yesterday, and that was a lot of fun. So this is a repeat session, and what I'll be talking about today is how we go about facing the diverse challenges in healthcare education. They're pretty complex and they're pretty broad. So what we've done at Sydney Adventist Hospital is we've integrated a Moodle. So we've got 2.6 and we've got mobile devices and a whole bunch of digital authoring tools to create some multimedia fun bits. And we're really changing the way that and reshaping the way that learning occurs in our hospital. So I'll give you a little bit of background about what I've done in the past. So I've pretty much been an e-learning facilitator for, I don't know, about 15 years now. So I've spent about 19 years in the vet and health sector. And I've always worked in adult education, which I really enjoyed doing because I like seeing how technology and training affects what people do in the workplace. So I find that really interesting. I've always mentored other educators. So Teresa's saying I'm a little bit loud. Okay. How's that, Teresa? Is that a little bit better? Hopefully it'll settle itself down. Okay, great. Thanks, Teresa, for that feedback. So yeah, I've sort of done a lot of extensive work, and I've really been employed in large organisations where we tend to roll out really big and complex learning management systems. So I spent about 16 years in TAFE doing that, and I've been at the Sydney Adventist Hospital for the last 2 years, and that's been quite different. It's quite a unique organisation in that there's about 2,500 employees, and it's a 24/7 organisation, and the challenges of training those people are pretty complex. So we run mainly clinical training, but also lots of non-clinical compliance type training. And because it's compliance training, there's no ifs or buts about it. It has to be done. There's legislative requirements which require us to do that kind of training. But if we look a little bit closer at some of the challenges, we've actually got our hospital is actually 3 hospitals. So, we're geographically dispersed. We have very busy and time-poor staff, and they get a lot of information, so they tend to get quite frustrated at the information overload. They're very diverse in literacy levels, so we have to cater for that. And obviously training ties in with risk management and reporting. But one of the biggest challenges that we face, and I've put this up because it's a mindset, and I'm sure that as educators and people in e-learning, you've all faced this kind of mentality, where things are a little bit hard to change because people are stuck in their ways and they're afraid of the unknown, and they take a little bit of convincing. But it's all part of perseverance and having conversations with people and getting up close and personal with them and talking about the possibilities. So that's what I've managed to be able to do successfully. But as you know, e-learning is all about changes, and it's all about meeting training expectations. So I think I mentioned quickly before, in a large hospital, there's a whole bunch of training, but the biggest expectation is that training is authentic, and that means people need to feel like they're ready for the workplace. It's, a lot of the environments that they work in are pretty critical. So that, critical care, there's no room for error in patient care, and they really need to be made to feel like they've got, they're ready for the job and they can go ahead. Okay, so I've just put this up just so we can have a closer look at the word experience. So, I said that what they're after is an authentic experience. So when you look at the Oxford Dictionary type definitions of experience, the word practical always comes up. And when you talk about, healthcare, that's got everything to do with training in healthcare, because training in that kind of environment has to be practical based. So it is a hands-on, occupation, and all the occupations are pretty much hands-on, and people need to be made to feel like they're ready to go. So when I first, just to give you a little bit of background, we actually redeveloped our e-learning site and launched it about 12 months ago. So this time last year, when I presented at iMoot, I talked about our upcoming implementation, which was about 2 weeks away. So we did that with the support of Pukunui, Julian Ridden, who's sadly since left Moodle, and Pukunui was the consultant who helped develop and roll out our new SAN e-learning site. So as part of that whole project, I went and interviewed a whole bunch of people, approximately 50 or 60 people across the organisation at all levels, in all departments. And they really, at first they thought, I have nothing to offer you. I don't know anything about this thing called e-learning. But it wasn't e-learning I wanted to ask them about. It was about their expectation and what they wanted the experience to be. And these were the words that always came up. They always wanted it to be relevant and, authentic. They wanted it to be pitched at the right level so that they were challenged and not dumbed down. They wanted it to be enjoyable and interesting and interactive, and really at a thinking level, not just, click and next and have 30 slides where you just work through them and read, a little bit of text on the screen. That's quite boring. And they really, as one thing that I've discovered from being in e-learning is that they really wanted it to be very flexible and user-centred. I actually, prior to working at the hospital, I worked for TAFE New South Wales, and I worked for the distance arm of TAFE, which was OTAN. And 50% of actually more than 50% of the students who were there lived in the Sydney metropolitan area. So it showed us that people don't come to e-learning because, they live in remote areas. They come because it's handy and they want to be able to, get the sort of maximise their time. But when we look at a hospital environment, we kind of look at, and I think this isn't unique to a hospital environment, but it's very obvious in our environment. Where do people really learn? So, there's a little bit of e-learning, which is, doing bits and pieces online. There's some workshops. There's a lot of clinical practice, so a lot of dialogue and mentoring and learning on the job and talking to people and watching. So, when we look at that kind of learning, or those kind of learning habits, we really see that the pathway to learning success is not a straight line, which is what most people think. There's lots of mistakes and alternate pathways, and all of us are different, and we all pretty much have our own sort of unique way of doing things and looking at things and taking new ideas and new knowledge on board. So, having talked about the experience and the training requirement, let's look about the technology, because this presentation is all about, how do we use technology to meet those learning expectations. So a lot of people don't like the word e-learning because they think that it suggests that the learning experience should be different. So does the E really make a difference in the learning experience? Does everyone think? Should it make a difference? No? Okay. Well, my take on it is that it really shouldn't make a difference. It shouldn't define the learning experience, because the instructional design of things, that's right, everyone's agreeing. It's all about the learning. It's all about crafting the appropriate learning experience. So, figuring out what what the sort of performance requirements are, and what needs to be achieved, what changes in behaviour need to be achieved, and working that out. So not even looking at the technology or the how, you're looking at the what to begin with. And technology doesn't make a difference. So I personally love the word e-learning. I love to embrace that little e, and what it comes down to is using technology to put together a blended learning solution. So if we look at our original question of how do we harness technology to meet learning expectations in healthcare, we can see that we bring the best of all worlds into this kind of situation. So we use technology to enhance e-learning, to enhance the classroom, to run simulation workshops, and I'll talk more about those in a little while. There's fantastic tools in Moodle where we sort of run conditional learning pathways and scenario-based learning. There's the obvious tools for collaboration and bringing people together and getting them to communicate. Feedback and reflection is a massive part of learning strategies in the clinical arena. So often when I'm working with the educators and we're putting together learning packages, it's we're working out how we provide feedback to the learners, whether it's instant feedback or it's consolidated feedback. So it really has to be valuable and reflect the workplace, which is like a fantastic way for learners to get the best out of their learning experience. So if we look at specifically how we use technologies, the clinical training really lends itself to these types of concepts, which is exploration, simulation, reflection, sharing and collaboration. And technology just enhances those opportunities. It really makes the experience much more memorable, and ultimately you're looking at improved patient care. So what are the benefits of blended delivery? Well, it means that there's much increased flexibility and learner support. People are learning on their own terms, asynchronously. They're moving ahead in their own time. The educators can really also track what's happening, how the group is going, how individuals are going, and they can sort of respond accordingly as well. We've talked about conditional learning and increased interactivity. So we're finding that since we launched the new e-learning platform and we're using the more scenario-based approach in our packages, that our learners are much more enjoying the learning experience. They're not just clicking through long sort of lesson type packages. They're sort of being asked to make decisions and read scenarios. And we've also really gone to an effort to add videos and pictures and just contextualize the whole experience. So what it's really done is it's made it a lot more fun, just because there's a lot of variety in there. So looking at some of the strategies of how we're using technology to mix things up is, we've got our e-learning platform, we've got lectures and interviews, we've just started trialling webinars, so we're using Big Blue Button and we're trying to figure out how that's going to fit in. There has been a lot of discussion about running both in-services, clinical in-services, and packages or training packages for the wider clinical community, and forming even just to local community and running webinars on different sort of health interests. We run group workshops, and there's a lot of discussion, and that's where experts come in and people observe, and then we're trying to use iPads in those workshops as well, so that we can capture information and record, and people can reference during those discussions, which is great. We've got a fabulous simulation facilities at the hospital, so that's where there's lots of skills demonstrations, and we use the digital simulation man and the apps to create those really hands-on scenarios, which are great. And there's the clinical practice arena where that's where our staff are mentored and they get feedback. And by combining all of those things and putting technology in the appropriate place, it's really, really enhancing the learning experience. So I think I've mentioned some of these tools, but I'll go through some of the ones that we really like. We're taking advantage of YouTube and lots of the clinical videos that have been shared by other clinicians on YouTube. Obviously, these take lots of time to develop, and if we can harness what's already been developed and shared across the wider healthcare community, that's a real advantage to us. We like Animoto. We've recently discovered a tool called Powtoons, which we absolutely have all fallen in love with, and we'll be publishing lots of those at the moment. If you haven't used Powtoons, go and try it. It's a free or very cheap tool to use. It basically creates animated cartoons, and what we'll be using it for is to create little scenarios of clinical case studies and have sequels and have people sort of watch these 1 or 2 minute animated videos and give their feedback on them, or basically it's clinical case histories, but they're really easy to develop, and it's a really great tool. I think I mentioned webinars before. Digital authoring tools, we've found that Storyline has been fantastic for us in helping us put together real, very easily scenario-based clinical training packages. We're using SurveyMonkey, not just after our training sessions, but prior as well, just to gather some input as to where people are at, what their knowledge is, what they're thinking. I put Pingo in there. We're not actually using Pingo, but I've discovered it through my son, who's at university, first year of uni, and his lecturers apparently are using Pingo. And what it does is it just, might be sitting in there with 300 students, and you poll the whole room, and you ask a question, so the lecturer immediately knows where everyone's at. I think Pingo has been developed by a German university, and it's only available to other universities around the world. So if you are from a uni, you're probably eligible, but I put it up there because the feedback that I'm getting from a few people is that it's quite a fun tool to use. There are similar systems. Thanks, Therese, for that input. Apps. I've made special mention of apps here because our clinical educators are really starting to love these. We've purchased a whole bunch of iPads at the beginning of the year, and they're all of a sudden discovering a whole bunch of apps, and they're using them for different things, mainly for simulation. So I've put down a couple of websites there. I don't know if anyone here is from the clinical area or works with provides consulting to the clinical areas. This is iMedical Apps is a great website. It's a website that's run by clinicians, and what they do is they review clinical apps, and they sort of provide feedback about how effective they are in the workplace. So we have found that our educators are really taking off with apps, and they're really loving them. Now, I'm making special mention of social media here. So at the moment, we don't have a social media presence at the hospital, but it's going to take off very quickly. The hospital has been quite reluctant to come on board. I think it's more a fear of the unknown, and seeing a lot of the silliness that happens in the media and not really understanding some of the benefits that can be gained just in professional networking and sharing of knowledge and forming those communities of practice. So we're looking at things like forming LinkedIn groups and Twitter groups and things like that, and just trying to harness on the collaborative effort of the clinical arena. So we've talked about the experience and the training requirements and the tools. When it comes to choosing these tools, we've got some broad criteria, but they pretty much have to, be easy to use, and they have to be able to be the sorts of tools that support the critical thinking, which is really important. They have to, the multimedia element is a really big part of eTools. We've even gone to the effort of we've just about to buy our own video camera, which also takes photos, and we're at the point where we're thinking we really don't need Hollywood production videos. We don't have the funding for it anyway. So if we buy a camera and we just start creating or taking our own videos and taking our own photos that fit in right with our own training needs, then we'll be able to quickly develop some good multimedia resources and embed those in our scenarios. And clinicians love examples. They love to see their visual learners. So that's what we're, one of our next big things is to do. So I'll just give a little bit of background. Actually, I'll just skip that slide as to what we've done in the last 12 months. So I mentioned before that 12 months ago we implemented a new e-learning site, and it's gone really well. We had this vision that it would be quite simple and user-friendly. Oops, sorry, the slides are moving ahead quickly. I have uploaded the slides onto my course page as well if anybody wants to download them. And here's an overview of the components. So more than 12 months ago, when we designed the whole training strategy, there was obviously the e-learning component, which was Moodle. So we did that quite successfully. We're really happy with that. We're looking at web conferencing, and hopefully that will become a core part of our delivery strategy as well. Then we've got content authoring tools, which, they've been fantastic for our scenario-based. We've integrated those kinds of elements with face-to-face sessions to sort of bring everything together. And what that's done is it's helping to bridge the gap between the online and the face-to-face. We are looking at a content management system because we don't have a digital content management system to manage those workflows. So I think the slide that I skipped through quickly before talked about the fact that we do have checklists and procedures for managing workflows, but they are manual, and it's not ideal. It's a little bit time consuming, but it's all that we have at the moment. So hopefully we'll be able to get some funding, and in the next 12 months just move on to or incorporate a content management system as well. So the other thing that looking more specifically at the Moodle component, we upgraded a few months ago to 2.6, and now 2.7 is almost out, so we'll have to do that very soon as well. We've been using all these fabulous Moodle tools as well as the digital authoring tools to create authenticity and conditional activities, which I think is really the way to go for clinical learning. Which is fantastic for all of our learners. I've got the next slide coming up. Sorry. So when we launched our new site last year, we were a little bit rushed. So many of our sites or many of our course pages looked like this, which is quite boring. You've got a few PDFs and a quiz thrown in, and that's it. So it's not that engaging. But we are moving more towards like this, where we're integrating, we're using the tools in Moodle to integrate the online and the offline components, and we're, starting to add some more interactivity and some more opportunities for people to keep conversations going. So the site has been quite successful. We've got over 80% of our staff, have logged in and are completing packages, which is great. There's been a massive spike in the middle there, and that was when we were being audited last year by some legislative requirements. So we all had to go and do our compliance training, and that was done. Now, I did mention that about 20% of our staff haven't been on there yet, and that takes into consideration the fact that there are people with lower literacy levels, people who really don't have access, and we accommodate those learning requirements in other ways. We provide, the off-site type or the offline type training, which is great. So, the bottom line, as educators, we have to be flexible. We can't just, give a one-size-fits-all to our learners. So basically, what's innovation done for our hospital? It's really helped us, incorporate simulation-based training, helping people to replicate those decision-making opportunities. So, rather than give people a PDF and then give them some pretty boring multiple choice questions, we're giving them scenarios, and scenarios that mimic the real world, and we're asking them to make the decisions that they'd be expected to make in the real world situation. And in that way, that they actually have to go off and they have to do some exploring and thinking, and that all comes down to critical learning, which is what it's all about. I've mentioned multimedia resources, and that the purpose of those is to really add context and clearly demonstrate so that there's no ambiguity about clinical procedures, which is really important. Building skills, which is all about giving people confidence and helping people establish their place in the workplace, making them feel like they are contributing and they're part of a team. And the last point I've put there is learning, by just making learning part of the everyday workplace and life experience, you're just sort of embedding it into everything that we do, and hopefully we're helping people sort of starting to form relationships beyond and just be more community focused. So here's just an example that I wanted to put up of a program that we run which really harnesses technology to deliver a training program. So this is a program that was initiated about 12 months ago, and it's a program it's called the Nurse Re-Entry Program. It's a program for nurses that have been out of the workplace for 5 years but not more than 10. And what it does is, the program is only one of 2 delivered in Australia, and it's designed to help those nurses bring their clinical skills back up and basically be current so that they can maintain their registration, which is obviously critical to them and critical to the industry, because there is a massive shortage in nurses in Australia. So the program primarily has 4 elements. There's e-learning, there's the face-to-face, the simulated environment, and the clinical practice. And by embedding technology in the appropriate areas, in all of those areas, we're bringing everything together, tying it all up, and we're really providing a great learning experience for these participants. So the program is run over 10 weeks, and it's pretty much a 4-day-a-week program. They're assessed both online and informally and formally in the critical workplace, so that we have skill assessment and knowledge assessment as well. And the program's been really successful by adopting that blended learning approach. Some of the changes that we're hoping to make is to incorporate more scenario-based learning and add webinars in there so that we can get them involved, preferably before they arrive, and also just for ongoing ease of collaborating with especially with the facilitator. So that's been a really, really successful program for us as well. Some of the other current projects and trials which we're working on is where we're looking at more use of the simulation labs and the iPad apps, just to try and harness on using those tools for referencing and for running simulations. There's some brilliant simulation apps, especially I was working with one of the educators the other day, and there's a great one on ECG training. It's called Dark Sim. So that's, you basically use your phone or your iPhone as a little remote control, and then you've got your iPad as the monitor, and you make changes, and there's a whole bunch of scenarios in there. So it really mimics the workplace, which really livens things up for participants. One of the things we are looking at doing is making sure that when we bring in technologies, that we're doing it in a considered way. So part of our resource development process is that we do have validation teams, and we're sort of using this approach for bringing in new technologies as well. So we're forming teams to try and evaluate, or small teams to evaluate new technologies and figuring out whether they're going to be used in education or just for referencing purposes or for point of patient care. So that's the approach that we're taking, just to make sure that we are using a much more considered approach. And it's okay at the end of the day to say that, hey, a technology didn't work out for us. At least it's a learning experience for us as well, which is fantastic. So one of the other really, really exciting things that we're going to do this year is we're going to host the first ever Health Moodle Moot that will be held at our hospital. We're going to be supported by Pukunui, which we're really excited about. And we pretty much decided that, there's lots of great Moodle Moots around the world, but they are for everyone. So we thought health, Moodle's really taken off in the health industry, and it would be really good to collaborate with other Moodle administrators and educators and people who use these types of technologies that are specific to healthcare. The challenges are quite specific, so we are going to run a health moot. So if you know anyone who's in the health industry and might be interested in this, it's going to be run in Sydney, and it should be a really exciting day, which we're really looking forward to. So we're in the planning phase at the moment. One of the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve from the Health Moot is to form a health e-communities of practice. And why we want to do that is because we want to continue the conversation going around Moodle in healthcare and how we use Moodle and related technologies. So that way, if we form a community where we're able to support the educators in healthcare and educators using Moodle in healthcare, I think that's just going to benefit everyone, and it's just going to really add to staff capability and the level of training and the type of training. So really focusing on the real needs of the healthcare industry in terms of training. So thank you, Stuart. Yeah, we think it's a good idea as well. Unfortunately I can't make Cairns this year. I'm missing out, but I guess fortunately my family's going to Europe, so that's why we won't be going to Cairns. But I was pretty excited initially when they said, the conference will be held in sunny Cairns. But I'm hoping all of you will have a good time anyway. And if you don't make it, maybe you can come to Sydney and come to our health moot. So. I've just put this up. I think most educators have seen this, but I actually love this report. It's just brilliant. So the Horizon report is just a fantastic report that really predicts the trends from the next 12 months to 5 years and how it's going to impact training and higher education. So if you haven't read this, I highly recommend you go ahead and read it. This is just, I think the next slide that's about to come up is just pretty much a snapshot of what the report is covering. But you'll see right up the top, the first bit of technology, social media, it's just there, it's ever present. So we need to look at ways to embed it in the workplace and use it for training, for, communication and, crowdsourcing and networking. And it's just, I think when workplace managers need to move away from the mentality or the negative mentality that's seen in the media, and just try and harness on the good side of social media as well. Just specific to healthcare, I think some of the things that are really going to make a difference is more adoption of the hybrid learning and the flipped classroom, and I think the 3D printing. I just think once that the 3D printers become affordable, they'll just become part of healthcare training, and if we can print out images and organs and bits and pieces, and people can actually see and touch and play with these kinds of models, I think it's just going to take training in clinical areas to another level. So I'm really looking forward to that type of technology becoming more affordable. Now, the reason I've put this little picture up, don't know if there's any Simpsons fans, but I've got 2 children, a son who's 18 and a daughter who's 15, but when they were in primary school, they used to make me play this this game with them. It's a PlayStation game called Hit and Run. Don't know if anyone's ever played it. It's a pretty funny game, actually, where the Simpsons family, you pick a member of the Simpsons family or community, and you pick a car, and then you race each other around Springfield. And I was always really bad at this and would lose because I smashed into everything. And my son especially was really good at this game, and he hardly ever hit anything, and he used to fly around in record time. And the reason I'm telling you this story is because he always used to say, oh, I think I'm going to be a great driver because I'm really good at this. Anyway, eventually he went for his license at 16, and, of course, panic buttons as a parent set in. and it wasn't like hit and run. But the point of it, of using that kind of technology is that it started a conversation and it introduced him to some of the elements of driving, and it didn't make him a good driver. I guess it was the hands-on component that made him a good driver. But he, the point of using simulation is that it does give us some idea about the decisions that we have to make and the elements in the environment that we're about to be introduced to. And that's really, really relevant in the clinical area. Sometimes we muck around when we're at work and we go to some of the apps. Like there's a fantastic app where you can perform arm surgery, and I don't have a clinical background, but I go and play on that. And it does start out as being a bit of fun, but then you kind of get into it, and you have to make decisions about particular instruments that you have to pick up and where you're going to make incisions and what order you're going to do things. So this is where we're bringing technology into the clinical training arena to introduce people to those concepts before they actually get hands-on. We're getting their decision making right before we're getting their skill set right, and that's pretty critical in that environment. So to sum up, we've been quite successful in using technology in the clinical area to engage people, to make it more interesting. It's much more interactive, which is what our staff wanted. They didn't want the click and next button. They wanted the scenarios and the stories, because that's what the clinical area is all about. They wanted to be able to do it on their own terms, at their own pace, in their own pathways, so we've enabled that as well. They wanted it to support the clinical skills practice, and made to feel that they were ready to take on their sort of offline training component and assessment. And basically, technology has increased our delivery and assessment options. It's enabled us to extend our reach, and mobility has been fantastic because they've been able to take these tools and sort of just go with them. We don't even have a formal training room anymore. Oh, actually, we do have a clinical training room, but it looks like a hospital room. There's 8 beds in there, and we use the iPads, so we don't have a sit down in front of a PC training room anymore. We just don't use it, which is fantastic for our learners. And it's all about enabling group learning, and giving sort of people good feedback as well. So, all of these things just translate to really good quality of patient care, which is the ultimate outcome of any training, I think, in any organisation. So on that note, that's pretty much the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take questions or comments. If is anyone here from the clinical area, I'd like to hear, how maybe you've used technology in the workplace. But if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them on.
Thanks very much, Gina. That was fantastic, and thanks also for raising our awareness of the health moot that's coming up. So I can see there's a question coming in the chat there, folks. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat, or you can unmute your microphone if you find it easier to talk through your question, or have that little bit of conversation. And there's also a discussion forum in the iMoot course, and Gina's uploaded her slides there, as she's mentioned. So even if you think of something after we've left the room, then that discussion forum's available there. But Gina, thanks again, and I'll let you hang about and answer the questions that come in. Thanks again.
All right, thanks Teresa for your support, and to the iMoot team for running a great conference again. Thank you. So I can see Maureen's added a comment. So you're a teacher from early childhood. Yeah, I think, Maureen, there's just synergies across all industries. I remember last year I went to the Moodle Moot that was held in Melbourne, and I think one of the most interesting talks that I heard was from a teacher it was a lecturer at university, and I think they were teaching something to do with animal husbandry. And it was just fantastic. And you kind of thought, and basically their whole concept was, being out on the field, using the iPads, taking videos of students as part of the whole assessment process, and just integrating all of those elements. So you don't have to just talk to people in your industry to get really good ideas. There are synergies all over the place. So Kim. Okay, Kim teaches ultrasound. So where are you from, Kim? Are you from a healthcare organisation? We actually have one of our emergency care doctors specialises in teaching ultrasound, and we're sort of looking at ways to try and be able to make those videos accessible. As I mentioned before, one of our really big challenges is content management. Okay, you're from Michigan. Oh, fantastic. But yeah, obviously there's so many resources that are being just used as or developed as part of the clinical care process. So we need to be aware of patient privacy, so we can't just take these ultrasound videos and put them on YouTube. There's patient information on there. We need to be able to take them, block out names and patient numbers, and then put them somewhere where we can actually search for them and make them accessible and embed them into our learning resources. So that's a challenge which we're going to have to face very soon, because now that we are moving more into the multimedia space, and it's been really welcomed by our clinicians. We are going to have to address all of those issues and sort of make sure that we can track what resources we have, we can find them, and we can ensure patient privacy. Okay, is there anyone else for the question? Yeah, videotaping. When I worked at TAFE, we had a fantastic and a very progressive children's teaching section. So that, they obviously had to do, similar to your situation, they're practical. And yeah, it was always really tough getting permission to videotape sort of teachers in those scenarios and use those as learning resources, and to create those learning resources. So I don't know what the answer is. It's a bit hard to stage something like that. And I think learners don't really want something staged. I think I mentioned before that we are just buying a video camera and we're going to start creating our own videos. And if you look on YouTube, there's clinicians who are just pretty much taking a home video camera, putting it up there and demonstrating things like, how to roll a patient with a spinal injury. And, people don't want an actor. They don't want it staged. They want a real clinician. They want to actually observe the real conversation that goes on between two clinicians and, what decisions they have to make, what exchanges of information occurs between them, how they go about doing it. So, yeah, it really has to be real. Someone's visiting Powtoons now. Powtoons, if there's a really, really great, what's it called? It's called Deteriorating or Detecting a Deteriorating Patient. So if you go to YouTube and type that in, you'll actually see 2 animated videos. And one of our educators found those. And it just pretty much is a clinical story about, the course of action taken with a patient. And, there's part 1, and then there's part 2, which is, what really happened as a result of the wrong course of action being taken. And our educators found this, and, they sort of came to me, and we just saw how easy it was to put it all together. But I think that would probably work really well in a childcare setting as well. But the good thing, one thing that I've noticed was since we actually rolled out the new e-learning site 12 months ago, it took about 6 months, even for our educators, our clinical educators, to really sort of get on board with it. People don't like change. They see it as more work, and they get a bit overwhelmed with all the new information that has to come their way. But once the dust settled, I've noticed in the last 6 months that they're actually starting to ring me up and come to me and say, oh, I found this app. Can you help me figure out how it works, and can we buy it? And then they go looking for other tools, and they're just getting into those online spaces. And the more they're getting into those online spaces, the more they're seeing the possibility of what they can do themselves. So, I have them sometimes coming up to me and saying, I need a photo of this type of lesion, and we go looking for it. And obviously, you can't use you can't always find what you want, and there's always copyright issues. So I've said to them, well, is there any reason why we can't buy a camera and start taking our own photos? And we'd obviously make sure we wouldn't infringe on the privacy of patients, and we would do it with their permission, and we'd make sure that they couldn't be identified. But that's the sort of area that I think we need to go down. Developing our own resources and contextualizing it within our own environment as well. So, are there any other questions? Thanks, Kib. Well, it's still early here in Sydney. It's almost 11. So I think I'm going to now sit back and enjoy some of the other speakers and learn from them. So thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and I hope I've added some value to your training strategies, and I hope to hear from you. See you soon at one of the future Moodle Moots. If you're not connected with me, I love connecting with other educators from around the world, so you can find me on LinkedIn. And you can download my presentation as well from the course page. So thank you so much for coming along today and listening to my presentation. Cheers, everyone, and have a great weekend. Thank you.